after the kind of season the Broncos had had leading up to their season finale, it seemed only fitting that one last thing wouldn't go the Broncos' way as the Las Vegas Raiders rally late to send the Broncos into the offseason with their 11th loss of the year. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in for another edition of Broncos Beat. I'm Alexis Perry, joined today by Solomon Wilcots of Pro Football Focus, Cecil Lammey from 104.3 The Fan, and James Palmer from the NFL Network. Gentlemen, with both teams eliminated from playoff contention prior to Sunday's game, some thought that AFC West matchup might be the most boring game of the day, but clearly both teams had a lot to play for. In true Broncos Raiders fashion, these teams took us on a roller coaster of emotions that eventually ended in bewilderment as the Broncos gave up a late touchdown, a 2-point conversion, and subsequently the game. We'll get into some of the positives here in just a little bit, but I think it's safe to say that was not the way the Broncos imagined heading into the offseason, James.
Alexis, no, it's not. And some people weigh it more than others, guys, right, about what the momentum heading into your offseason means. Some people value it, some people don't. I think with a young team, it's important to go into the offseason with a good taste in your mouth. But the thing, Cecil, we talked about at last week's show, what did we want to see? We wanted to see them finally turn the football over. They did that. They forced four turnovers. Excuse me. They haven't been able to do that in almost a month. Worst turnover differential in the NFL by a long shot. We wanted to see Drew Lock not turn the football over. He didn't do that. They did those things right and still didn't come away with a victory. So, Cecil, to me, what jumps out the most is this game showed there's even more issues than the ones that were the glaring ones, which makes you have to examine even more this offseason about what went wrong with the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and there were so many things that went right. James is getting choked up here. It's your year, James. It's 2021.
They did what we told them to do.
We made it. We made it to 2021, and you don't really have the momentum that you wanted to. That's what I wanted. Listen, I know Broncos fans are saying this is the perfect loss because now they get a top 10 pick. It's still a loss. I'm the draft guy. I don't care about the pick. If you like a guy, you're going to move up to get the guy like the Bills did, like the Chiefs did with their quarterbacks respectively. Not that I think the Broncos are going to take a quarterback in the first round, but like the draft doesn't matter. Late season momentum, getting a win, winning more than one AFC West. Guys, they only won one game in the AFC West this year. That shows there's lots of room for improvement that is needed in James' year of 2021.
Yeah, guys, I think you're right on it. You do not play your games in the regular season with an eye on the draft moving forward. You're not trying to go into those games trying to figure out how to build your team moving forward. You got to go out and put your best foot forward. And you talked about it, their ability to take the ball away on defense, something they did against the Raiders, getting 4 turnovers, but yet and still they lose the game. Jerry Jeudy, we wanted to see him go out and catch the ball. He created big plays in the passing game, but yet and still they lost the game. You wanted to see Drew Lock do certain things in the game, and I thought he managed the game very well, didn't turn it over himself, yet and still they lost the game. They've lost 5 of their last 6 games, and I think to the greater point that Alexis was making, there's more that you need to look at in terms of the Broncos being able to improve and to be able to get back that winning culture that they had last decade.
We talked about the takeaways a little bit, but I want to kind of dive into that a little bit more. What do you guys think was the difference for Denver's defense on Sunday? Because that was an area that they really struggled in all season long.
Yeah, and turnovers come in bunches. We all know that. They were essentially, since they haven't had a turnover in a month, I would say they were due for a couple of turnovers. But I do think one of the biggest things was they were out there actually with somewhat of an eye for the football. The guys we've talked about, Cecil, repeatedly were the 2 only mainstays in the secondary this entire season, right? Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons. Those were the guys we were hoping would have a nose for the football, and they did in this game. But at the same time, what limited them in a lot of games this season, I was actually just before the show talking to a coach on another coaching staff about the issues with their defense in 2020, when you're limited about what you can call and what you can play in when you don't have the talent or the bodies to go out there and do it, Cecil. So we will say this. That secondary in this defense was limited in what they can do because of the personnel they had, because of the injuries they had. They couldn't play the way that Vic Fangio would want them to play. They did have spurts where we saw them play well, but at the same time, when you can't do everything you want to do, it's harder to force turnovers.
Yeah, it's harder to force turnovers, and I like to see the pass rush. James, I'll talk about Ohio State's very own Draymond Jones.
Let's do it, baby.
How about that? Buckeyes for life, because you look at what he was able to do. That's an ascending talent with, the 6.5 sacks this year, and 3.5 came over the last month, and that's as a rotational player. Imagine as he does more. Lots of changes coming up front on that defensive line. So you look at that sort of interior pressure that makes every quarterback look mortal. Thank God for those guys in the secondary, specifically Simmons and Jackson, as you mentioned. And I'll give it up. I mean, they tried against Darren Waller. They did. But whether it was Will Parks, my man Parnell Motley, he just couldn't cover that guy who's on a incredibly different level, converted wide receiver, now tight end for the Raiders. And that caused the problems that you saw defensively, especially late in that game.
We talk about turnovers coming in bunches, and it's very tough to manufacture them on a week-to-week basis. However, the fundamentals of how you play on defense, you play defense like you're on offense. It takes a tremendously high football IQ from all 11 defenders working in a choreographed plan where everyone understands what to do. That's when you put the pressure on the opposing quarterback to try to figure out, what are these guys doing? Remember, we've heard young quarterbacks say, I'm seeing ghosts out there. That's what veteran defenses are able to do. And then obviously you got to catch the ball when it's thrown to you. When the ball is on the ground, you got to be able to recover the fumbles. But the really, truly great defenses, they have 11 tremendously smart football players who play aggressive. Yes, they wreak havoc, but they understand how to put the offense behind the 8 ball and then force them to make mistakes. And that's when your turnovers, that number goes up. And so I think the Broncos are getting close to being that. I think on offense, they have a lot of youth, and they've got to really get used to not turning the ball over and being more consistent as well.
Cecil, you mentioned Draymond Jones. We saw Jeremiah Atachu pick up his $250,000 sack. Malik Reed finished with a team-high 8 sacks this season. So even with the crazy number of injuries that the Broncos front 7 had this season, why do you think that group was still able to be so productive this season?
Yeah, it's all about fit. There's your Broncos Beat bingo again. It's about fit in the NFL. And Malik Reed is fit and so flourished in his second season. You love seeing that. Draymond Jones, a Fangio favorite, a favorite of all of ours. He's a fit in this system. You mentioned Jerry Atachu. I hope they can bring him back on another 1-year deal or couple-year deal, whatever the number is, because he does fit, and they understand what they're supposed to do up front to get after that quarterback. And that's why you see, there's many questions that are looming this offseason that we will get to and we will talk about. But up front, you've got some rotational guys, some guys that are coming up the list and looking better with more potential, more production in the future.